My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 75 years old. For 20 years I have lived in this same house, our matrimonial home, without the man I married. For 20 years he never called, never wrote, never asked of me. One day he just left. And the worst part, I never knew why. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and warm, the kind of morning that makes you want to hum while making pancakes. He walked out of our kitchen door carrying only a brown leather suitcase. I thought he was going on one of his work trips. I even blew him a kiss as he stepped into the sunlight. But when I called his office a week later, the secretary told me he had quit the company 2 days before he left. My heart turned cold. And that was the moment my life changed forever. I didn't see him again. Not for 1 year. Not for 5. Not even when my mother died, or when our youngest daughter, Emily, had her first child. The house stayed the same. Our photos still on the walls, his old coffee mug still on the kitchen shelf. But it was like the man had been erased from the earth. People asked me, "Margaret, why didn't you move on?" But I couldn't. Something inside me kept saying there had to be a reason, something I didn't know yet. And maybe, just maybe, one day he'd walk back through that door. But what really broke me, and this is what I have never told anyone until now, was the letter. The letter I found under our bed, tucked inside a shoebox, just 3 weeks after he left. It was addressed to me. The handwriting was his. But what it said inside was something I could not understand and something that made me afraid. We'll get to that letter soon enough. But before I tell you about the words that kept me awake for years, you need to know who I am, and the life I lived before the day my husband walked out. Where are you watching from? I always like to know where my listeners are, because stories feel different when we know who's hearing them. My story isn't just about me. It's about kindness, about love, about how a person can survive the worst kind of loneliness without becoming bitter. I was born in 1950, in a small town in Ohio called Maplewood. I grew up in a house with peeling paint and a mother who could turn one potato into a meal for 5. My father worked at the mill, and every night he'd come home with the smell of sawdust and coffee in his clothes. I was the youngest of 4, the quiet one, the one who'd sit by the window and watch people instead of joining their games. I met John Wilson when I was just 19. He had a laugh that made you want to laugh too, even if you didn't know what was funny. He wasn't rich, far from it, but he was hardworking and carried himself like a man who knew where he was going. We met at the diner where I worked part-time, and he came in every morning for 2 weeks straight just to try the pancakes. On the 15th day, he finally asked for my number. We married a year later, in a white church with a steeple that scraped the sky. Everyone said we looked like the perfect couple, and for years I thought we were. We had 2 children, Michael and Emily. Life wasn't always easy, but John worked long hours, and I stayed home to raise the kids. We were a team. At least, that's what I believed. There were little signs looking back now that something was changing. He stopped talking about work. He'd come home late, his tie loosened. His eyes tired in a way that wasn't just from labor. Some nights he'd sit on the porch, staring out into the dark like he was searching for something far away. But at the time I didn't think much of it. You see, love can make you blind, can make you excuse what you don't understand. One winter evening, about 2 years before he left, we had one of the worst snowstorms Maplewood had ever seen. Our neighbor's car broke down on the road, and without hesitation, John bundled up and went out into the freezing wind to help. That's the man I knew, the man who'd put himself in harm's way just to make sure someone else was safe. That night I fell asleep smiling, proud to call him my husband. But kindness and darkness can live in the same heart. That's a truth I didn't want to believe back then. The years passed. The children grew. Michael left for college. Emily started working at the library. The house became quieter, and I thought maybe John and I could start traveling, or spend more time together like we used to. I never imagined that instead of planning our future, I'd be watching him disappear into it without me. The morning he left, I was wearing my blue apron and flipping pancakes. He was dressed in his gray suit, the one he wore for business meetings. He kissed my cheek, said he'd be back later, and walked out the door. That was it. No argument. No warning. Just gone. The days after were the hardest. At first, I called every hospital in the state, thinking maybe he'd had an accident. Then I called his office, only to hear he had quit. I checked with his friends, his old army buddies, even the motel downtown. No one had seen him. It was like he vanished into thin air. I was still searching through our bedroom weeks later when I found that shoebox. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Inside were old photographs, a broken wristwatch, and that letter. It was sealed, with my name written in his handwriting. I remember sitting on the bed, holding my breath as I opened it. I read the first line, and my stomach turned cold. That's when I realized. Maybe I never really knew the man I married. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper felt thin, almost fragile, like it had been waiting for years to be opened. The first words I saw were, "Margaret, if you are reading this, then I am gone and I cannot come back." My throat tightened. The letter went on. "There are things I have done that you would never forgive, and things I must do that will put you in danger if you know about them. I am leaving because I love you, enough to stay away for the rest of my life." I stopped reading for a moment. The room felt smaller. My ears buzzed, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding like a drum in my chest. The rest of the letter was just as strange. No clear details. No confession of exactly what he'd done. Just vague words about mistakes and danger, and protecting the family. At the bottom he'd written, "Do not look for me. It's the only way you'll stay safe." Safe from what? From who? I read it again and again, hoping I'd missed something. A clue, a hidden meaning, but it was the same every time. A goodbye without an answer. I sat on the bed for hours that day, staring at the wall. And then I did something I've never told anyone until now. I burned the letter. Not because I wanted to erase it, but because I couldn't bear to read it again. Every word felt like a crack in my chest. I thought if I destroyed it, maybe I could destroy the pain too. But pain doesn't burn so easily. The days that followed were quieter, but in a different way. Not the peaceful quiet of a calm house, but the heavy quiet of someone waiting for a sound that never comes. I learned to fill my days with small things. Cooking, reading, visiting Emily at the library just to hear her talk about new books. And I made a rule for myself. Every Sunday afternoon, I would walk to the old bridge at the edge of town, sit on the wooden bench, and watch the river. I told myself that if John ever came back, that's where I'd meet him. It was silly maybe, but it gave me a place to hold on to hope. Life went on like that for years. Some days I'd almost forget the hurt. Other days it felt like he had just left yesterday. One spring afternoon, about 8 years after he vanished, I was out in the garden planting tulips. Emily came over, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a little box in the other. "Mom," she said, smiling, "this came for you." It was a small cardboard box with no return address. The handwriting on the front was neat, almost too neat, the kind that looks like it belongs to someone who takes great care in hiding what they feel. I opened it right there, dirt still under my fingernails. Inside was a single photograph, and when I saw what was in it, I dropped the box on the grass. It was John, standing in a crowd somewhere I didn't recognize. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, but it was him. And next to him was a woman I had never seen before, holding his arm like she had the right to. For a long moment, I just stared at that photograph, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. The man in the picture had John's jawline, John's posture, even that faint crease between his eyebrows he got when he was thinking hard. But the woman, she was young, maybe in her early 30s. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a neat bun. She was smiling up at him as if she'd known him for years, as if he belonged to her. The background was a blur of people, all dressed in light clothes, the kind you'd wear in warm weather. But I couldn't place the location. There were no street signs, no familiar buildings, just strangers moving about like shadows. I turned the photo over. On the back was a single date, written in the same neat handwriting as the address on the box. April 14, 2008. No message, no name, nothing else. Emily picked up the box from where I'd dropped it. "Who's the woman?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat felt too tight. Instead, I took the photo inside and set it on the kitchen table. My mind kept racing with questions. Why had someone sent this to me? Who had taken it? And what was John doing with her? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks and sighs of the old house. For years, I'd imagined him somewhere alone, maybe working odd jobs or hiding from some terrible mistake. I had never, not once, pictured him smiling beside another woman. The next morning, I put the photograph in a drawer and told myself I wouldn't think about it. But, of course, I thought about it constantly. Days passed, and I tried to keep busy. I baked pies for the church fundraiser, trimmed the roses in the garden, and spent long afternoons with Emily's kids, reading them stories about adventures on the high seas. I told myself life had to go on, even if the past refused to leave me alone. Then came the day that changed everything again. It was a Thursday evening, and the sky had turned that deep purple that means night is coming. I was washing the dinner dishes when I heard a knock at the front door. Not a polite knock, 3 heavy, deliberate bangs that made the glass in the windows shiver. When I opened it, a man I'd never seen before was standing there. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes as sharp as broken glass. In his hand, he held a small envelope. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my stomach tightening. He handed me the envelope and leaned in just enough for me to catch the faint scent of tobacco on his coat. "You need to stop asking questions about your husband," he said. "For your own good." Then he turned and walked away into the night, leaving me frozen in the doorway, the envelope trembling in my hands. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. My fingers hesitated at the seal, half of me desperate to know what was inside, the other half terrified that once I knew, there'd be no going back. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. No greeting, no signature. Just one typed sentence. "He is not the man you think he is." That was it. No explanation. No name. Not even an address to send a reply. I read the words again and again until they blurred, as if reading them enough times might make the meaning change. But it didn't. The sentence stayed the same, sharp and cold, like a blade pressed against my skin. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the note. My hands were shaking. For years, I'd told myself that John's disappearance had a reason, that somewhere out there was an answer that would make it all make sense. But this sounded like something darker. Something I wasn't ready to believe. I tucked the note into my Bible between the pages of Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" And decided I wouldn't tell Emily. Not yet. She'd already been through enough without carrying this weight. The next few days were quieter. I went to church, volunteered at the food pantry, and even joined a quilting circle at the community hall. I found comfort in those small acts of kindness, in the company of people who didn't know the shadows I was carrying inside. One afternoon, I was helping Mrs. Thompson, a widow in her 80s, carry groceries from her porch to her kitchen. She told me, "You know, Margaret, you're stronger than you think. Some people break when life turns its back on them. You keep walking." Her words warmed me, and for a moment I believed her. But strength has its limits. It was 2 weeks after the man's visit when the next blow came. Emily called me one Saturday morning, her voice tight. "Mom, you need to come to the library. Now." I hurried over, my heart pounding, wondering if one of the kids had gotten hurt. When I walked into her office, she didn't say anything. She just handed me a manila envelope that had arrived in the library's mailbox. Inside was another photograph of John. But this time, he wasn't just standing with the same dark-haired woman. This time they were holding a little boy. And the boy looked exactly like Michael did when he was 5. I stared at the photograph, my breath caught in my chest. The boy's hair was the same soft brown as Michael's when he was little. His eyes, that same shade of deep blue I used to see every morning at the breakfast table. Even the way he gripped John's thumb in the picture. It was exactly how Michael used to hold mine when we crossed the street. Emily was watching me closely. "Mom, do you see it?" I swallowed hard. "Yes," I whispered. Neither of us said the word, but we were both thinking it. Family. Was this child my grandson? The photo was dated June 2, 2015. Which meant John had been alive and well at least 7 years after he walked out of our kitchen. Alive, smiling, and raising a boy with another woman. I set the photo down and rubbed my temples. "Emily, where did this come from?" "It was in the library's mailbox this morning. No return address, no note. Just the envelope." I wanted to cry, to scream, to throw the picture across the room. But instead I took a deep breath. I had to be careful. I'd already been warned once to stop asking questions. If someone was watching me closely enough to leave envelopes at both my home and my daughter's workplace, then this was bigger than I'd thought. That afternoon, I tried to lose myself in the comfort of routine. I baked cornbread for the church luncheon, watered the tulips, and ironed the curtains in the front room. But no matter what I did, my mind kept circling back to that little boy's face. If he was John's son, what did that make me? Was I supposed to hate him for existing? Couldn't. The thought made my heart ache. It wasn't his fault he was born into a story full of secrets. 3 days later, I decided I couldn't sit still any longer. I went to the post office and asked if they could trace the last 2 envelopes I'd received. The clerk, a young man named Nathan, frowned. "Ma'am, neither of these have a postmark. They weren't sent through the mail." That meant someone had delivered them in person. I was walking back to my car, my mind buzzing, when I noticed something strange. A dark blue sedan parked across the street, its windows tinted. I might not have thought much of it, except that when I pulled out of the parking lot, the sedan pulled out too. I tested it. I made 3 right turns in a row, the way my father had taught me when I thought someone might be following me. The car made every turn. By the time I reached the old bridge, my bridge, the sedan was still behind me. I parked the car and got out, heart pounding, determined to face whoever it was. But when I turned around, the sedan was gone. Vanished, as if it had never been there at all. I stood on the bridge for a long time after the blue sedan vanished, the wind tugging at my coat. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that it was just some stranger taking the same turns by coincidence. But deep down I knew better. Someone was watching me. The thought made me feel both exposed and strangely defiant. I had spent 20 years living with silence, with unanswered questions. If someone wanted me to stop looking for answers, then maybe that meant I was finally close to finding them. Still, I didn't tell Emily. I didn't want her to start worrying about me, or worse, to get pulled into whatever web this was. I kept my suspicions tucked away, just like the note in my Bible. The following week, I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. I visited the church to help sort donated clothes, made lemon bars for Michael's kids, and even sat down to finish a quilt I'd started years ago. It was comforting in its own way, the feel of the fabric, the sound of the needle pulling through, the simple act of creating something whole from pieces. But the photograph of John with the boy kept slipping into my thoughts. I'd catch myself staring at the wall, imagining the child's voice, wondering if he laughed like Michael did when he was little. Then something unexpected happened, a small kindness that reminded me the world wasn't only made of shadows. One rainy afternoon, I stopped by the bakery to pick up a loaf of rye bread. The young cashier, a girl named Anna, slipped a small bag of sugar cookies into my sack. "On the house," she said with a grin. "You always look like someone who could use a little extra sweetness." It was such a simple gesture, but it softened me. It reminded me that life could still surprise me in good ways. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, looking out the window at the rain. I told myself I'd wait, that the truth, whatever it was, would come to me in time. And then, just as I started to believe it, the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting Emily or Michael. But the voice on the other end was low and rough, almost a whisper. "Mrs. Wilson," the caller said. "If you want to know where your husband is, be at the corner of Maple and 5th. Midnight. Come alone." Before I could ask a single question, the line went dead. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. My tea had gone cold, the rain still tapping on the kitchen window. The voice echoed in my head. Calm, deliberate, the kind that belongs to someone who already knows you'll do what they say. Midnight. Maple and Fifth. Come alone. For the first time in years, I felt fear and hope tangled together. What if this was finally my chance to get answers? But what if it was a trap? I thought about calling Emily, about telling her everything. But I knew my daughter. She'd insist on coming with me, and the voice on the phone had been clear. Come alone. So, I spent the next few hours moving through the house like a ghost. I locked all the doors, drew the curtains, and slipped John's old flashlight into my handbag, along with a small can of pepper spray Michael had given me years ago, just in case. By 11:30 p.m., the rain had stopped, leaving the streets shiny and black under the streetlights. I drove with the windows up, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. No sign of the blue sedan, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I turned onto Maple Street, the air seemed heavier, like the whole town was holding its breath. Maple and Fifth was a quiet intersection. No shops, no houses close by, just a boarded-up corner store and a street lamp that buzzed faintly. I parked a little ways off and walked the rest of the distance, my footsteps loud in the stillness. First, the corner was empty. No cars, no people. Just the hum of the street lamp and the faint smell of damp pavement. I glanced at my watch. 11:58 p.m. Then, from the shadows near the boarded-up store, a figure stepped forward. A man, tall and lean, wearing a dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He stopped just far enough away that I couldn't see his face clearly. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear. I nodded, clutching my handbag a little tighter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a plain envelope. "This is everything you need to know about your husband," he said. "But once you read it, you'll never see him the same way again." Before I could respond, headlights swept across the intersection, a car speeding toward us. The man's head jerked up. "Go!" he shouted, tossing the envelope at my feet. Then the car's tires screeched, and the sound of a door slamming cut through the night. The envelope lay at my feet, pale against the wet pavement. My instinct screamed at me to grab it, but the sound of the car door slamming was too close, too sharp. I bent down, snatched it up, and bolted toward my car. My shoes slapped against the asphalt, my breath loud in my ears. Behind me I heard footsteps, fast, heavy, and a man's voice yelling something I couldn't make out. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly it took 2 tries to get the key in the ignition. The headlights of the other car swung toward me, flooding the interior with blinding light. For a moment I thought they'd block me in. But I reversed hard, tires squealing, and shot down Maple Street. My rearview mirror showed the dark sedan pulling out after me, its headlights bouncing as it gained speed. I took a sharp left, then another, weaving through side streets I knew well. Finally, on the narrow lane behind the old mill, the sedan vanished from sight. Either they'd given up, or they were smarter than I hoped. When I got home, my knees felt weak. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat down at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. My fingers hovered over it for a long time. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what was inside, not if it meant confirming my worst fears. But I had to. Tore it open. Inside were several photographs and a folded sheet of paper. The first photo was of John, much more recent than the others. His hair was almost white now, his face lined, but his eyes were the same. The second photo made me gasp. It was the boy again, only older, maybe 12 or 13, standing in front of a school. And next to him was John's arm, resting protectively on his shoulder. Then I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was different this time, slanted and hurried. "He's not just living a new life. He's part of something dangerous. Keep looking and they will come for you too." I was still staring at the note when my phone buzzed on the table. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You have 3 days to stop. or you won't live to see the truth." The glow from the phone's screen lit up my face in the dark kitchen. My fingers felt stiff as I set it down. 3 days. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. I could feel the weight of it in my chest. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands shook so much that I nearly spilled it. Sitting at the table, I thought about the warnings, the photographs, the man in the shadows. This wasn't just about John leaving me anymore. Something bigger, more dangerous, was curling its way into my life. Part of me wanted to disappear for a while, go stay with Michael and his family in Denver, or even take a bus somewhere far enough that Maplewood would be just a name on a road sign. But another part of me, the part that had survived 20 years of silence, refused to run. If John was mixed up in something dangerous, I needed to know what it was. Not because I wanted revenge, not even because I wanted him back, but because for 2 decades, I had been living in the shadow of a story I didn't understand. And I was done living like that. Still, I knew I had to be smart. I started by making copies of the photographs and notes, hiding them in 3 different places. One inside an old cookbook, another in the bottom drawer of my sewing table, and the last tucked behind the lining of my winter coat. If something happened to me, I wanted the pieces of the puzzle to survive. The next day, I drove to a neighboring town and bought a prepaid cell phone. I didn't want to use my regular number anymore. I also started noticing little things. The same silver pickup parked near the grocery store 2 days in a row, a man pretending to browse at the hardware store who kept glancing at me. I couldn't tell if I was being paranoid or if the noose was actually tightening. On the second night after the threat, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The summer air was warm, the street quiet except for the distant sound of crickets. I made my way toward the old bridge, my steps slowing when I saw something that froze me in place. Leaning against the railing was a man. Not just any man, John. His hair was whiter, his shoulders a little stooped, but it was him. He looked right at me, his expression unreadable. I opened my mouth to call his name. That's when I heard the sound, the low growl of an engine approaching fast. The headlights cut through the night, blinding me for a split second. When my eyes adjusted, John was no longer leaning against the railing. He was moving toward me fast. "Margaret, get down," he shouted. I froze, caught between disbelief at hearing his voice and the roar of the engine closing in. A black SUV came speeding toward the bridge, its tires screaming against the pavement. The windows were tinted, but I could see the faint outlines of figures inside. John grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the side, pulling me down behind the concrete barrier just as the SUV tore past, missing us by inches. My heart hammered in my chest. "Who was that?" gasped. He shook his head. "No time. You can't be here. 20 years, John. And the first thing you say is..." Before I could finish, the SUV's brakes squealed somewhere up ahead. The red glow of its taillights bled across the bridge as it skidded to a stop. Doors opened. More than one. John's grip tightened on my arm. "We have to move. Now." We ran down the slope at the far end of the bridge, weeds and gravel crunching under our shoes. The sound of footsteps followed. Fast, heavy and getting closer. John led me through a gap in the trees, down toward the riverbank. The air smelled of mud and wet leaves. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop until he finally pulled us behind a cluster of fallen logs. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing and the distant rush of water. John looked at me, his face drawn and pale. "I didn't want you involved in this," he said, his voice low. "But they've been watching you. You have no idea what you've stepped into." "Then tell me," I whispered, my throat tight. "Tell me what's going on." His mouth opened as if he was about to answer. But then, from somewhere in the darkness, a beam of light swept across the riverbank, followed by the sharp metallic click of a gun being cocked. The sound of that gun being cocked cut straight through the night air. John's eyes locked on mine, a silent warning, and he mouthed one word: "Quiet." We crouched low, the damp earth soaking into my knees. The flashlight beam swayed back and forth, slicing through the darkness like a searchlight. I could hear 2 voices now, both male, both close. Check down by the water, one said. They couldn't have gotten far, the other replied. John motioned for me to follow, and we began inching along the fallen logs, staying in their shadow. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a shout. When we reached the edge of the logs, John pointed toward a narrow trail that wound up toward the old railway tracks. We moved slowly, careful not to snap a twig or kick a rock. The voices grew fainter, but the light kept sweeping the trees. At one point it passed so close to us that I could see the dust swirling in the beam. I held my breath until it moved on. At last, we scrambled up the embankment to the tracks. The moonlight glinted off the steel rails, and the world felt momentarily open and wide again. But the relief didn't last. John grabbed my arm and pulled me into the shadows beneath the trestle. "They're not just after me anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want you to." I shook my head. "Why? I don't even know what this is about." His jaw tightened. "Because of what I did before I left. Because of who I worked for. Margaret. I wasn't just selling insurance." I blinked at him. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a train horn blasted in the distance. John looked over his shoulder toward the riverbank, then back at me. "If I tell you now, they'll kill us both before we make it out of here. We need to get somewhere safe." We started moving along the tracks, the thud of our footsteps blending with the growing rumble of the approaching train. But just as we reached the far end of the trestle, a figure stepped out from behind a support beam. It was the same tall, broad-shouldered man who had delivered the first envelope to my door. And this time he wasn't holding an envelope. He was holding a gun. The gun glinted in the moonlight. "End of the line," the man said, his voice low but steady. John stepped in front of me, his hands slightly raised. "You don't need to do this, Mark." So he had a name. Mark's gaze shifted to me for the first time. "You were told to stop digging, Mrs. Wilson." I meant it. My voice trembled, but I found my courage. "I didn't go looking for this, it came to my door." "You made sure of that?" Mark's expression didn't change. "Because I wanted you to understand what you were stepping into." John took a step forward. "She understands. Now let her walk away." Mark's jaw tightened. "Can't do that, John. You know too much, and now she does too." The air between them was thick, almost humming with danger. The rumble of the train grew louder, the vibrations trembling up through the trestle. "Tell her," Mark said suddenly, his tone sharp. "Tell her what you were doing when you walked out on her 20 years ago. Tell her why you left." I looked at John, my heart pounding in my ears. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice heavy. "Margaret, I was working for a private contractor. Not the government, but close. I moved money. A lot of money. Some of it was legal. Some of it wasn't. I stumbled onto something I shouldn't have. Money tied to people who could ruin entire governments if it got out. They offered me a choice. Disappear quietly or end up buried. I left to protect you." My mouth went dry. "And the woman? The boy?" He flinched. "The woman was someone they sent to keep an eye on me." "The boy?" He glanced at the ground. "He's mine. I couldn't protect you and raise him with you at the same time. So I kept my distance." The train was almost on us now, its roar filling the night. Mark adjusted his grip on the gun. "Enough talking." John moved fast, shoving me sideways toward the slope. The train thundered past just as Mark fired, the shot swallowed by the deafening noise. I stumbled, rolling down the embankment, my hands scraping against gravel. When I looked up, John and Mark were gone. Only the train remained, a blur of steel and sound racing through the night. I called out, but the wind carried my voice away. It was an hour before I found my way back to the road, my clothes torn, my heart still pounding. There was no sign of John, no sign of Mark, just the empty night, and the envelope of photographs I still had hidden at home. I never saw John again. But sometimes when I'm at the bridge on a quiet afternoon, I swear I can feel him there, watching from the shadows, making sure I'm still safe. And even after all this, I'm not sure if I forgive him. But I do know this. Some truths are heavier than silence. And once you carry them, you can never put them down.